Beijing wanted this to be a celebration of communist rule. But in Hong Kong, they took to the streets in protest. Not everyone was demonstrating, though, far from it. There are large numbers of people in this city who support Beijing. But those who wanted to watch the pomp and circumstance did so in muted fashion.
即係我喺80年代上去大陸咧，個經濟即係比較上好慘。但係當呢30年咧，比我哋香港仲先進嘅環境，同時咧，全世界都係社會安定咧就有發展㗎啦。
This is a city divided, and where the balance lies is not clear. But there was no doubting which side filled the streets today. The authorities banned their march. The protesters ignored them. Much of public transport was closed. That didn't stop them either. For now, it was peaceful but defiant.
Well, they're trying to set light to a Chinese flag there, and it's hard to overemphasize how subversive that feels on the mainland on a day like this.
Over the past 3.5 months, the stakes have been steadily rising. In response to heavy-handed policing, some protesters have become increasingly confrontational. We met one of the so-called frontliners.
And if you see anyone looking in through the window, just duck down, yeah?
Radicals who guard their identities fiercely and now see no turning back.
If I get shot in the head and I die, it's okay.
Seriously?
Yes.
But you might die for nothing.
If I die because of the police guns, this may raise the awareness of the society. Because I can be the first protester that died from the guns, not suicide.
It sounds like you almost wish for such an outcome.
No, I'm not wishing that I die for this. But if it happens, I can't control it because it depends on the police.
Away from the big central march, smaller demos sprang up across Hong Kong. In the past, protesters have focused their anger on the political symbols of the Chinese state. But here was something new.
Here's what's interesting, and I haven't seen this before. Look at this. China Construction Bank. The glass is shattered. These protesters, there's another one here. CCP is capitalist, says the graffiti. These people are targeting the financial institutions of China.
We find ourselves at a junction in Kowloon, where people are building barricades. Everyone is nervous. When a car doesn't stop at the roadblock, jumpy protesters lash out. Suddenly, things look like they could turn ugly. Just up the road, police are gathering. And then, some news filters through.
You heard the police had fired 2 shots. Yes, we heard the same. Did you see it yourself? You didn't see it? Okay. All right.
Not far away, we learned, a policeman had shot a demonstrator with a pistol at point-blank range. By now, battle lines were drawn.
Here we go. The police are literally just over there. These guys have got Molotov cocktails. Okay, that's the tear gas. Here it comes.
Against volleys of tear gas, the protesters hurled bricks and petrol bombs. One of them gets hit with what looks like a rubber bullet. These were scenes repeated in at least half a dozen locations across the territory. Block by block, the police pushed the protesters back.
This is not a protest anymore. This is turning into urban warfare. The protesters are throwing Molotov cocktails. The police are about to charge.
In the end, bricks and umbrellas are no match for actual firepower. This was exactly what Beijing didn't want to see today. They wanted it over by now. But the young radical we spoke to earlier promised to fight on.
Today is important, but today is not the end game.
You think it will continue?
Yes. Until those 5 demands have been achieved, the most fundamental demand is universal suffrage.
Democracy?
Yes, democracy.
Events are escalating. Each protest ends in greater violence and more arrests. This used to be a city where Hong Kong and Chinese identities could sit alongside each other. Increasingly, people are being forced to pick a side.
That was Gabriel's report. He's still with us. That was extraordinary testimony from your young radical, Gabriel. Do you have a sense of where they go or where this goes now?
Well, look, over the past few months, lots of people have said there are 2 things that are going to cause a turning point here. One was today itself. Lots of people were seeing this anniversary, the 70th anniversary, as a sort of do-or-die moment, both for Beijing and for the protesters. But also, people said things will change when someone gets shot with live fire. Now, of course, there's been a lot of grief around that, but the sun is coming up here today, and overnight, we haven't seen significant protests coming out because of that in anger. What we've seen actually over the past few weeks is Beijing's rhetoric shifting from a couple of months ago where they were saying, we will not sit idly by, we will step in and quash this if the local authorities can't deal with it, to actually Xi Jinping in his ceremony today saying, respect for one country, 2 systems. So what I think we're going to see is these protests are going to continue, and probably with increasing tensions and violence as we've seen.
Gabriel, thank you very much indeed. Gabriel Gatehouse there in Hong Kong. And joining us now is Tsang, who is the director of the China Institute at SOAS, and Bob Seeley, who's on the Foreign Affairs Select Committee, returned recently from Hong Kong. Welcome to you both. Do you sense, Steve, that this is a turning point, and that means a turning point not least in how China reacts?
Well, I think it's a significant landmark event today, but in the end, luckily, it was not a turning point. If the demonstrators in Hong Kong had managed to disrupt the ceremony for celebrating the 70th anniversary, or if they had thrown petrol bombs at the Chinese government's liaison office in Hong Kong, then I think we would be reaching a turning point. We will be seeing a significant escalation of response from the Chinese government. That didn't happen.
Wait, and you think that would be warranted?
No, I'm not saying that it would be warranted. It's simply the way how I think the Chinese government will see that would be crossing the line of what would be tolerable. Attacking Hong Kong government. Because it would be
embarrassing on a day of national celebration, or because they would think that this was something that had been crossed?
And that will be something that has crossed a line in terms of challenging the authority of President Xi Jinping. That's something which Xi Jinping will not tolerate.
This is the whole point, Bob Seeley, presumably. I mean, they want to challenge the authority and they have to be seen to be challenging that authority. The question is how far they're prepared to do that.
Yes, and I think there's a danger here that if the civil disobedience splits from the broad consent of the majority of Hong Kongers who want the one country, 2 systems, I think it becomes easier for the Chinese and Hong Kong authorities to isolate the more extreme factions. And I think that's a problem that...
Do you think Hong Kong as a whole is on the side of the protesters now?
From what I saw, yes, up to a point. But if you get a hardcore protesters that are simply geared towards violence and seeking confrontation and civil disobedience, then I think the risk is there that they lose the support of people who want the one country, 2 systems, and they are seen as increasingly extreme and isolated from the rest of society. That's a risk.
Mainland China doesn't see any of this, presumably. They don't get pictures of the protests aired on television. Is there any sense amongst Chinese people of what this battle is about?
Well, yes, people in China do now have a sense of what's happening in Hong Kong, but not in the sense of what you have been reporting here. What they are seeing is what the Chinese government would like them to see, which is that you have a whole bunch of very spoiled young people in Hong Kong who are acting under the inspiration and direction of foreign black hands who are causing all these problems in Hong Kong, and the heroic Hong Kong police force is working with the Hong Kong government and the leadership of the Chinese government to deal with it in a very measured way. That's the kind of image that people will be getting.
And it's impossible to fight that kind of propaganda if that's what is being fed. In terms of what would actually make Beijing react in another way, it's going to be foreign eyes on this, isn't it?
I'm not so sure, because I think that Beijing sees this as an internal battle, and despite the British government saying that the Sino-British Accord is alive and well, it's an international treaty, it should be respected. You had the Chinese ambassador on your programme a few weeks ago saying the Sino-British Accord isn't relevant anymore, it's a treaty that represents the past. For China, this is an internal issue.
So you think, so the joint declaration essentially is dead in their eyes?
The Chinese are saying it's dead. In reality, it is absolutely not dead, because it is a live international treaty.
Well, if they're not respecting it, then with respect, it is dead. It's not
they're saying to the Brits,
followed.
butt out, this is none of your business, and they're saying that to the rest of the world.
And whose fault is that?
You're dealing with two great trends at the moment. One is the growth of Chinese power globally, in whatever form. Domination of 5G markets, the threat to Taiwan, South China Sea, Hong Kong, but you're also seeing an increasingly authoritarian Chinese state. So not only is Chinese power expanding, but the nature of that power is changing from what the Chinese state was 10, 20 years ago.
I wonder if you'd accept that this didn't happen overnight. You know, we're 20 years on from 1997, 22 years on. And if you start turning away from the struggles of Hong Kong in the early days, then you can't expect to regain your footing when it matters, when it comes to crisis point. Do you think there has been a dereliction of duty on the part of the British government?
No, because we only have so much influence. I do think we have to be vocal about this, and I do think that, above all, Britain and the United States and the European Union, we need to join the dots. Democracy is a wonderful thing, but we don't always plan ahead as much as we should. And what's happening in China is that there is a plan for the next few decades, be it Belt and Road, be it domination of 5G, be it exchanging one country, two systems for one country, one system. And I think we're not joining the dots, and we need to see this as a bigger picture.
Do you agree that there is a growing authoritarianism now for China, and it's really important it wins this battle?
Well, there is clearly a growing trend towards authoritarianism in China. If you compare China today with China 10 years ago, you can see the huge difference there. 10 years ago, you have human rights lawyers working in China, you had labor union leaders working, you had civil society working. Now all these are gone.
Thank you both very much. Thanks for coming in.